Nahida can blow up your enemies' minds. And today, I'll be telling you how to build her best. Let's get into it. So what artifacts does the radish use? None other than 4-piece Deepwood Memories. This is essentially 4-piece Viridescent for Dendro characters. Nahida's main job is to apply Dendro, but it always makes the most sense for her to wear it within Dendro teams. Otherwise, 4-piece Gilded Dreams takes the stand, an ideal choice if another character in the team is using 4-piece Deepwood. It'll make Nahida's personal damage fly. Her second best in slot on the whole. 4-piece Golden Troop is also a new viable option. Gilded Dreams will be better, but if you're already farming this domain, it'll be a viable option. Mix and match stats include 2-piece Dendro percent, EM, attack percent, and skill percent. As for main stats, Nahida has 2 main routes. EM, and EM damage percent, crit percent. The EEE, wow, sounds like Yai's gameplay build, is good for teams where nobody else goes on full EM, such as all Hyphen Spread teams or Nilu Bloom teams. You want to aim for as much EM as possible for Nahida's A1 buff. 1000 EM should be your cap. Vegetables A4 also gives her crit rate based on her EM, so it's also viable to swap her circlet to a crit one for an EEC build. The EDC build is good for aggravate and spread teams. You can get away with a bit less crit rate than usual thanks to Nahida's A4. So instead of me recommending the usual 70 to 140 for a non-crit weapon, I'll recommend 60 to 150, 60 plus to 200 plus if you're on a crit weapon. Nahida's substats aren't too difficult. You should take care of building Nahida's ER. This also won't be too difficult. Nahida's gonna be fine on Deepwood, but have a look yourself if you're using other options. Now what weapons does the vegetable use? Let's look at Nahida's weapons. R1000 Floating Dreams is currently her best in slot. Lots of EM and team-wide buffing is great. In Dendro teams, definitely her best choice. Otherwise, R1 Kagura's Verity is excellent for her personal damage. The DPS of it is actually close to Floating Dreams, nice for aggro and spread comps. R5 Sack Frags is another wonderful choice. Lovely EM stick, which she loves. Refinements don't matter much here. Nahida doesn't need the extra skill cast, as that's not how she regens particles. R5 Widzif is solid and will provide your Nahida with good buffs. All the crit is also quite good. Solar Pearl and Sacrificial Jade will perform similarly. R5 Wandering Even Star is fantastic, and when paired with characters who like the buff, Even Star's buffing rivals Floating Dreams. Lovely Nahida option. R5 Magic Guide is a wonderful cheap choice which is surprisingly powerful. The main issue? Nahida's Dendro application can overtake the Hydro or Electro on the enemy nearly all the time, so the passive can be a bit inconsistent at times. Craftable choice Mappa Mare is the same performance-wise as Magic Guide for an on-field Nahida. R5 Hakushin Ring also works for aggravate teams. It's nice since Fischl drives aggravate very hard, and Fischl snapshots the buff from Hakushin Ring. R5 Prototype Amber is a free-to-play friendly craftable. It'll let Nahida heal the whole team, consolidating defensive utility. She regens her own ER this way too. Only downside? Very low personal DPS. R5 TDDS is another good Nahida choice, but your damage will be very low on her. This is purely a choice used for buffing the team even further. If you ask me, Wizdif and Sack Frags will cover all your Nahida ever needs, so go for those if you can. These rankings are on Nahida's damage, be aware of that, since maybe a more supportive choice like R5 TDDS will help your team do more DPS on the whole. By the way, where does Nahida work best? Seriously, anywhere Dendro's involved, so I'll cover Nahida's main cores here. First, Hyper Bloom. This core consists of Nahida, an Electro built on EM, and 2 Hydros. The Electros can be Raiden, who is amazing ranked for skill, or Cookie, who heals the team and appreciates EM builds. The Hydros can be Lady Farina, Yolan, Chingcho, and Ayato. Noivale is fine too. It's good to on-field Nahida so you can get as much AoE damage as possible here. This won't work if you're playing Noivale Hyper Bloom though. It's more centered around the usage of Xingqiu and Yolan. If you add a second Dendro or Electro, you can get a Quick Bloom team. Hyper Bloom focuses on generating EM-based cores. Quick Bloom focuses on taking advantage of spread and aggravate more, while having a few Hyper Blooms on the side. One of the strongest teams in the game right now is a Quick Bloom comp. Alhaitham, Farina, Cookie, and Nahida is something special. You can also play Alhaitham, Yolan, EM, Raiden, and Nahida. These are very strong teams. You can also play Sino Quick Bloom, consisting of Sino, Farina, or Yolan, Nahida, and Baiju. You can get away with replacing Baiju for Fischl, Cookie too. But Baiju has excellent synergy with Sino in particular. This is his best in slot team and is incredibly powerful. and for Bloom teams. Another insanely powerful archetype. There's only one rule other than Nahida to play a good Bloom team, and that's Nilou. So, 2 team cores, Nilou Hydro Hydro Nahida and Nilou Hydro Dendro Nahida. Example teams include Nilou Kokomi Yalan Nahida and Nilou Yalan Baiju Nahida. Don't use Farina in Bloom teams. Her damage bonus gets wasted here as she does not buff transformative reactions. Also, that amount of HP loss is tricky to say the least. I will say that her personal damage is strong enough to justify buffing herself, but on the whole, you get similar results to just using Kokomi, and you still lack a healer. Really is that worth all the effort? Bloom is a really strong AoE comp. To sleep on it would be a grave error. Now we move on to Aggravate. 1 main core, Electro Official Nahida Flex. Official is a must because her A4 procs on electro-related reactions. Aggravate is an electro-related reaction. Your best bet for an Aggravate DPS would be Kaching or Yai. Kaching's main quality isn't just her damage, it's mostly how much electro she applies. She shoots off Official A4s like it's nobody else's business. Official covers Yai's weaknesses, lots of energy to gen to cover that insane burst cost, plus Yai's an electro catalyst. Kazuha or Sucrose is your best bet for the flex, but Lynette and Zhongli are also competent. Then there's Spread. Main core is Dendro Electro, then either a Dendro or an Electro, and the flex slot. Official's not ads needed here, since Spread is a Dendro-related reaction, so her A4 doesn't proc. But still a great contender for the Electro choice, Yai as well. Alhaitham is the best Spread DPS we have right now, a complete must for sure. Tainari is also a strong standard DPS who's great in Spread. He likes to play in Tainari, Yai, Nahida, and Zhongli teams. Really high value for a standard unit. The flex can either be another Electro, Kazuha, Sucrose, or Zhongli. Spread is a pretty solid team. I also like to spread butter on my bread. Virgin teams, while on the weaker side, do exist. Hydro, Pyro, Nahida, Hydro. You always want to play double Hydro since Virgin needs more Hydro than Hyperbloom. The Pyro should be Toma as he applies Pyro and shields from Virgin's self-damage. Burning has only 2 teams, Ganyu Burn Melt and Rio Burn Melt. You can either play Ganyu, Bennett, Nahida, and Kazuha, or Ganyu, Dia, Nahida, and Kazuha. Yes, an actual use case for Dia. In a Ganyu Melt team, which allows you to utilize her burst, and Nahida provides lots of EM buffs to the team. Burning is also kept very consistent on enemies. You can replace Ganyu with Rio for another very strong Burn Melt team. Great, your Radish is on a full plate now, but how does she work? What are Nahida's talents? First, her normals. Nahida does 4 hits of Dendro damage to an enemy. You can actually play Nahida on field to apply more Dendro to enemies. Decent normals, simply just by being a Dendro Catalyst unit. Her skill is wonderful. It can mark up to 8 enemies, dealing and applying Dendro damage, and it has both a press and a hold. Pressing the skill sends out a tiny seed, which marks nearby enemies in a small radius. When you hold, you can aim Nahida's skill for up to 5 seconds. Nahida's interruption res also increases while she's in this position. To quickly apply seeds on enemies with your hold, shake the camera violently around the Abyss Arena. I'm being serious. Now on her own, Nahida deals no damage. She isn't a solo unit. Her skill's damage magic happens when you trigger reactions on marked enemies. Once every 2.5 seconds, when a Dendro reaction is triggered on marked or connected enemies, Nahida will unleash an instance of damage scaling up both her EM and attack. And that's where all the damage comes from. Beast Blasts deal Dendro damage, so the application on her skill is insane. Now for Nahida's burst. She creates a very big dome. Wowza. Its buffs depend on what elements you have in your team. For Pyro, Nahida's skill damage gets increased. For Electro, Nahida can proc instances of skill damage more often, the 2.5 second intervals being lowered. For Hydro, Nahida's burst duration increases. If you have 2 of these elements in one team, then the effects get strengthened even further. The 2 Electro means that you'll proc even more skill damage instances as an example. The only condition to receive these buffs, stay within the giant freaking house Nahida makes within her burst. Not a tall ask, if you ask me. Now for Nahida's Ascension passives. Nahida has a game-changing A1. The on-field character in your team will get a 25% EM buff based on the team member with the most EM when her burst is up. This caps at 250 EM, so you'd want 1k EM on one teammate to max out her buffing capabilities, which in most cases would be Nahida herself. As for her A4, each point of EM Nahida has above 200 gives her 0.1% more damage bonus and 0.3% more crit rate to your elemental skills damage instances. This caps out a 24% crit rate and 80% damage bonus. Amazing A4, which improves Nahida's personal damage, also makes her easier to build. As for her talent priorities, simple. This first priority lineup is if you want to play off-field Nahida, focusing on her main damage and Dendro application source, when her burst buff and normals last. But if you want to play Nahida on field, her normals become more worth considering. Even so, don't skip out on leveling that burst of hers. Nahida's own damage is nothing too insane, so leveling her talents is not a huge deal. She'll work out the box for you as long as she's leveled. The only time Nahida's damage comes into question is with spread, and even then, spread doesn't scale off talent levels. Yippee for resources. Great, but what if you want your Nahida to grow to the next level? Let's take a look at Nahida's cons. Her burst buff is enhanced by +1, so if you have 1 pyro in the party, her burst now treats it as 2, and if you have 2 pyros in the party, her burst treats it as 3. Not that big of a deal, but it's an acceptable con. Nahida turns Dendro into a nuclear reaction at this point. Enemies marked by her skill are in for a treat, since all core-based Dendro reactions can crit now, with crit rate fixed at 20% and damage at 100%, and with aggravate and spread, has a 30% def decrease on enemies for 30 seconds. Wild. Very good con if you're looking to hugely invest into Dendro teams. Nahida's skill talent improves by +3, extra damage is always delicious. When 1 to 4 enemies are marked by her skill, Nahida gets an EM increase of 100, 120, 140, and 160 respectively. Not a huge C4, but it isn't bad either. Upgrades her burst by +3, nothing major, but it's a nice bonus to have, only pick it up on the way to C6. It's DPS Nahida time! After Nahida hits marked enemies with a normal or charge attack after using her burst, she'll deal an especially huge blast on the enemy and all connected enemies. This Dendro damage scales on 200% of Nahida's attack and 400% of her EM, and triggers once every 0.2 seconds. This lasts for 10 seconds and ends after Nahida has unleashed this nuke 6 times. This is obviously very good, but it's a C6 so it has to be. Looking to vertically invest into Dendro, C2 Nahida is an amazing start. You can consider floating dreams afterwards. Otherwise, she's a fully complete unit at C0. I wouldn't recommend going for C1 on its own. C2 beats Signature, but Signature beats C1. Well, Nahida brings power in spades, despite her small size. Easily a top 5 character and a unit I highly recommend to all Dendro enthusiasts out there. She's aged well and will continue to age well. I will say she hasn't done much in the Fontaine meta, but she doesn't have to, since Dendro teams are still some of the strongest teams around. Hopefully this guide was able to get your Nahida blowing the minds of your enemies. Well then, this has been Juice, signing out, and I wish you all a night of restful dreaming.